Hello, welcome to the Special Report, your news and views program about geek gaming culture on the internet. Coming up in the show today, a Final Fantasy XIV subreddit user finds something that may hint at the possibility that they will implement the ability to fly in the Realm Reborn zones, although it's just speculation and it has garnered a whole bunch of questions and a whole bunch of debate. We're going to talk about the debate and the questions because my name is JD Shadow. All this and the OC Remix track of the day comes your way right now. A recent discovery by a Final Fantasy XIV user that posted on the subreddit forum has indicated that the old zones, the ones that were introduced in Realm Reborn, might end up getting flying introduced within them, maybe as early as the story squish in the upcoming 5.3 patch that they were aiming for. Now keep in mind, this is just speculation as to what might be on the horizon, and none of the devs have made any official statement as of yet. However, the reason for this is that one of the users on the subreddit forums has found that there are now new barriers included within the old zones. These barriers are the same as the barriers you would normally find in the zones when you fly and you go up further than the game will allow you to do so. You suddenly see a soft aura and the phrase that you can't go any further than where you're trying to go. These are in the Heavensward, the Stormblood, and the Shadowbringer zones, which do include the ability to fly once you find all the Aether Currents and you complete the quest that unlocks one for you, which one is usually on the last main scenario quest line. Now, according to past dev notes, they were not intending on introducing flying in the older Realm Reborn zones, or ARR as some people abbreviate it as. However, this was during a time in which they were also supporting the PlayStation 3 as one of the supported platforms for the game. They have recently dropped support for the PlayStation 3 version of the game, and that may have opened up the Pandora's box for this possibility. However, one of the other things that this could have actually been an indication of is for symmetry of the other zones, in which they had introduced ocean fishing into the game as of the 5.2, the incredible 5.2 patch that was introduced just a few days ago. But according to a few people who were in the subreddit, the barriers that were introduced were not exactly necessary in order to include unless it was something else they were going to add along the pipeline. One of the other clues to indicate that something might end up coming down the line is the notion that the outside building of Limsa no Minsa got a bit of an upgrade, a bit of a facelift. At first, it looked like it was quote-unquote melting, but recently in 5.2, one of the things that was not said that they in fact did was a graphical facelift of when you look outside the building in La Norsa and you look toward Limsa no Minsa, you suddenly see that it is looking a lot better, as if it was an actual building that you encounter in the game instead of just a cardboard cutout. It's easy to see why they would go with these graphical shortcuts when the game first was introduced, as I said before about the PlayStation 3, and also because there was really no reason for them to render anything outside of the inbounds parts of the zones. Zones that, by the way, were heavily fragmented for the case of the consoles, more specifically the PlayStation 3. And as I said before, because the PlayStation 3 is now a non-supported console in the upcoming patches and expansions for Final Fantasy XIV, the door might be wide open for things to change in that front. As you may have seen, Heavensward, Stormblood, and definitely with Shadowbringers, the size of the zones have become quite massive, to the point where the developers probably did not think that the PlayStation 3 could handle it anymore. Plus, keep in mind, the PlayStation 3 was becoming more and more outdated hardware, and because of that, compared to the PlayStation 4 and maybe even the Xbox One and definitely the PC, it didn't seem viable for them in order to continue to develop for that system if they wanted to continue to expand upon how expansive the zones actually were. However, this in turn has led some people to effectively jump the gun and to now sort of expect that they will in fact receive flying in the upcoming patch, and at the very latest by the next expansion. This goes along the way of the dangers of data mining, which is saying that, hey, we may get this, we may get spoiled into it. This is something that has played Guild Wars 2 and WoW for a long time, in which people find out about upcoming features and about upcoming weapon upgrades before the developers are intending to reveal them, or if they're intending to reveal them at all. And it has led some people to worry about the idea of expectations, that we're now expecting to have flying in the old zones at some point, and some opinions have come out for and against the idea of flying mounts within the old zones. But some people have said it would make sense that it might be introduced as early as the next patch, given that the story squish that might come in conjunction with the new game plus, although it may not go hand in hand at all, is set to debut by this upcoming 5.3 patch, which is a bit down the line. And some are comparing it to WoW and how they implemented flying in Cataclysm within the old zones. But if you remember, during that time, they were also reworking everything in the old zones. They felt like the old zones were not refreshed enough. They were not akin to how their ways of developing the game were at that point in time. They learned a whole lot more since then. But to some people's chagrin, because they like the charm of the old zones. They like the charm of how things like the Barrens and places like that were like at that point in time, without all the fissures and the lava pits and stuff like that. But then you got all those factions about what quality of life was like and stuff like that that started to form. So let's get into the discussion about this, because I have a bit of things I want to bring up. Now, before I go any further about whether or not there should be flying in the old zones, whether or not there shouldn't be, the comparison between how Final Fantasy XIV would do it versus how WoW would handle it, let's first get into the whole idea of data mining expectations and stuff like that, because I do believe that it has become something in which a few people have said something about it, but I do want to bring my 2 cents into it. Yes, to some degree, people who data mine and want expectations, it's a good and bad thing, because in a way, you kind of are able to plan out your path to progression easier if you know beforehand where you want to go. If you're trying to get that world first on a raid kill or stuff like that, if you want to know how to get to that point of all the upgrades that you're going to need to get, if you're trying to go for that competitive world first, then you're going to need to know that information probably as soon as humanly possible. And for that reason, maybe data mining could be useful in that sort of way. But the good has come with a bit of bad, because if you get stuff like this in which developers are not intending to announce it right away, or if they're not really planning on doing it at all, remember, there's really no developer announcement that anything even remotely like this is on the horizon. This is something that people are speculating about because they found this one corner of a zone. Then that could lead to people becoming immensely disappointed. Now, this might not be the same thing as when we had the Viera and the Hrothgar. Now, if you remember, there were some people that were indicating that the developers did not want to gender lock any of the races. As it was with Final Fantasy XI, you had the Mithra and the Galka, which were female only and male only respectively. Here, you had the Mitok, who are male and female, and you also have the bigger Galka-like people, I forget the names of them now, I don't play them that often, and if at all, who are also male and female. And for the record, the male Mitok looks like that cat from Log Horizon. I just want to bring that out there. But then you end up having the Viera, who end up being female only. You had the Hrothgar in order to compensate for that. And I think the expectation of that came from the notion that all of a sudden now they're reversing course of what they were saying, and now that we were getting gender-locked races. And to their credit, maybe that's their way of trying to introduce 2 races in one go, because in a way, they did say they didn't want to introduce any other races, but they got those in there now. They can actually change it without saying, hey, we're going to introduce new races. Maybe now they can reverse course later on and say, hey, we're going to introduce male Vieira and we're going to introduce the female Hrothgar, or whatever they want to bring into the fold. So we kind of did end up accepting that, but we were taken a little aback because of some things we were told about. This was not something we just mind. This is something that was actually told to us that they were not going to do, and then they ended up doing it. So that was the reason why you saw some people think, wait a minute, what the heck, Square Enix? However, that having been said, there's a lot here to indicate there might be something to this. Now, first of all, is this adequate enough to suspect that they might be planning it? Let's keep in mind the big evidence here, that they dropped support for the PlayStation 3. The main problem that Square Enix had for a lot of the development was that console. Now, I'm not saying the PS3 was a bad console, but any stretch of the imagination, I own it. It was one of my first introductions into the next gen, or where was it, the 7th gen we were in at that point? It was one of the systems that when it was nearly $500, I still wanted it because I thought it was the better system. And it ended up being, spec-wise, the better system. But it was very hard to develop for. We had a lot of horror stories with it. But over time, it got a lot better. It got a lot better support, a lot better player base. But when the PlayStation 4 came around and you started to see that it could do a lot more than the PS3 ever could, that's when you start to see that Square Enix might be saying, okay, now we got the ability to produce massive zones. Stuff like you're seeing in Heavensward and Stormblood, and especially in Shadowbringers. I think those are even bigger than anything you've seen even in Heavensward and Stormblood. And for that reason, I do believe that they needed to do something. They needed to drop support for the PlayStation 3. And that was the one thing that was the main barrier that was preventing them from maybe making some of these changes. And maybe not just with flying. We'll get to that in just a moment. What I also believe may be on the horizon here, that some people on Reddit might have actually speculated to as well. But that might have been the difference maker, as I've said. That if we end up getting flying, that would be the reason why. But here's the other thing that I think might be telling, is that why were these needed? You could say, hey, these are for symmetry with the other zones, that maybe they just wanted to have equilibrium there between all the zones so everything's consistent. That is fine, but why go through all that work if you weren't going to implement something down the line? If you're going to implement something down the line, you have to have some way in order to make sure things go smoothly. And in the old zones, the inability to fly was your barrier. It was something that kept you from going out of bounds. And if it was just bots, then you're not going to really do anything about the bots by doing that much, by doing something like that. So in a sense, I don't think this is something that we can just gloss over. This is not something that's like, oh, this means that we're going to be wishful thinkers. I think there's something to this. I think there is something to this. And I'm not trying to say you should expect it, because again, developers didn't say anything to it. They're being careful. They're playing their cards very close to their chest. I give them that. But at the same time, you can't help but speculate that there is more here. This little thing might be indicating something. But if they don't announce it, if they don't end up coming out with it, let's not be too disappointed about that, because quite frankly, they didn't say anything about it. So unless they come out and say, hey, we might be planning something and maybe they should be saying something about it, maybe Yoshi P can come out and say something about this and say, hey, we were thinking about it, we might have the possibility and we are hearing you guys, then yes, I do believe that if it doesn't come, let's not be too disappointed, because we were going off of our own speculations to introduce our own expectations. But I just think personally there is a lot there to say that they might actually be planning something. And if you look at that subreddit post, and I'll post a link in the description below this video about that particular subreddit post, you can no doubt see there is enough people who are saying things that make a lot of freaking sense. So I don't think it's just speculatory or some people who are wishful thinkers. I think they know there's something to this. Now to the other big part of the discussion. Should there be flying in the Realm Reborn zones? You're gonna hear a lot of people comparing this to WoW and how they implement it in Cataclysm. Cataclysm. And you're going to hear a lot of people for and against. Now, I'm definitely for flying in the old zones, provided they do things the right way. And there's a couple of reasons why you can't really compare this completely with how Cataclysm implemented it, because you don't really see a whole lot of people complaining that flying mounts exist in Final Fantasy XIV. I want to be quite honest with you, and maybe this is the excuse for me to bring this up, but have you ever seen a sheer amount of people complain so much about quality of life as you have within the WoW community? I have never seen anybody to that amount within the community complain and whine and moan that quality of life exists within WoW. I've never seen that. I have never seen people complain about meeting stones, about flying mounts, about anything, about mounts at all that I have seen from within the WoW community. And I'm not saying everybody has done this, but there's a lot of toxicity within the community about that, within a lot of things within the WoW community. I'm surprised Blizzard has put up with it for this long. And the discussion about flying mounts, whether they should exist at all, is one that will never go away. And I don't understand it. Why would you want to eliminate a quality of life feature that you have earned? There are too many flying mounts within the game for people to say, you know what, I earned that, let me have it. I earned that what a long street trip has been, which, yeah, I did that within WoW. Let me have that flying Drake mount. Let me have that. Let me use it the way it was intended to be used. I don't understand it. Every little quality of life feature, they, for some reason, want to take away. Somebody has a problem with it. I've never seen it that way. So when we talk about flying mounts within Final Fantasy XIV, there's a lot of differences between how they're going to implement it here and how WoW did implement it there, assuming they do implement it within FF14, including the whole idea with world PvP. One of the things that Final Fantasy XIV does not offer is world PvP, and thank God for that. Because have you ever seen how toxic world PvP is in WoW? I have seen people who their whole lives in WoW revolve in going into world PvP, going into low level zones, and ganking people constantly to the tune of harassing other players. And Blizzard rarely does anything about it because it's quote unquote part of the game. Those are the people that are claiming that flying mounts exist, because guess what they can do? They can get on their flying mounts and run away. Good! Yes! That's a case as to why you should have flying mounts within the game, because too bad. If you so wanted to do that so much, you want to camp people's body constantly, then you know what? You're gonna get the consequences. Good. That is the case for flying mounts in the game. Yay! But there's a more practical reason why. I'll get there in just a second. But one of the other things is that Final Fantasy XIV, as I've said before, does something that WoW does not. In WoW, flying mounts in the old zones is just akin to a gold sink. It's about 4,000 to be able to fly in the old zones. Now, keep in mind how Final Fantasy XIV does it. You have to go on foot throughout the entire zones to find the aether currents, and you have to attune to them, like you have to attune to a lot of other things like the aetheryte crystals within the game in order to use them, and you have to complete side quests in order to get the other ones. That to me feels like you are accomplishing something, that you are working towards something instead of just buying something from a store or something like that. You have to actually work for that reward, the risk versus the reward. And once you do all of that questing, you do all of that exploring, you've more or less explored all of that zone by foot, and now you get to see it from the air and you get that reward. That's much more engaging, and for that reason I don't think the Final Fantasy XIV people complain that much about quality of life features. They'd rather have them within their game. I don't see him complain too much about the aetheryte crystals existing. I don't see him complain about flying mounts existing within Heaven's Sword or in Stormblood. They love to have that. And the reason why is because these zones are made with flying in mind. But it also is a thing where Square has made it so you earn that right. You earn that. You have accomplished something. It's an engaging thing for you to do. And discovering those aetheryte currents are actually not that boring. It's actually pretty fun to go scavenger hunting for them, using that aether key or whatever, that aether clock thing that you use. It's actually really engaging for you to go looking for them. It's something for you to do in the old zones. People will go looking for them. That's an activity that people can actually do, and they get a big reward for it. They get a huge reward for it. And implementing that in the old zones and making you looking for those Aether Currents or maybe new quests in those old zones that tie the Aether Currents to them. That's a lot of things that you could add with, and then it would be very engaging. And I think that's why you won't see a lot of people complaining about that in Final Fantasy XIV. They don't complain about too much quality of life features, and they would rather have them. If WoW doesn't want them, if WoW players don't want them, put them in our game, put them in Final Fantasy XIV. We'll take them, but it does feel like you are engaged in something. And also the real reason why. Keep in mind that for the first couple of times you go into a zone, okay, you see it on foot and you go through it, okay, and you do find those Aether Currents. But by the 100th time you do that, it doesn't become really engaging anymore to do things, at least by foot. And if you're being forced into that thing, it might become quite repetitive after a while. Now, I'm not saying the old zones are bad. I'm not saying the old zones are bad by any stretch of the imagination. But maybe the reason why they're so dead is because those are the ones you have to do on foot. Those are the ones you have to do. Maybe that's the reason why, is because they're the least engaging of those zones compared to what they ended up doing in Heaven's Sword and Stormblood and Shadowbringers. They learned a lot since Realm Reborn. They've learned a lot since 1.0, to be quite honest with you. And also keep in mind that by introducing flying, there's a lot more perspective that you could have with those zones. There's a lot more things you could end up doing with those zones. There's a lot of things that you could do and place within those zones. There's a lot of places you can explore that you couldn't before. Maybe that chasm that's within one of the Thanalan zones. I forget which one it is. There's a bridge that goes over a huge chasm, and I forget where it actually is. It's where Drybone is, I believe. It's on the east end, I think. But if you ever wanted to go down that, currently you can't go down that. But what if you had flying? Maybe you can go down there. Maybe they won't put a barrier there. And maybe Square could add quests there that you could unlock stuff through there. There's a lot of things you can do, or maybe new vistas, new sightseeing places you can go to. There's a lot of stuff you can do by implementing this. But I don't think this is going to stop at flying. Keep in mind, one of the other things that the PlayStation 3 limited was the size of the zones. The size of the zones were very, very small compared to what you're seeing now in the expansions. What if by dropping the PS3 support, the reason why they might be adding flying is for the other thing they might be ending up thinking of doing, which is to combining the older zones together. Remember how big 1.0 zones were? Remember how big those were? And you know how small they are right now. Not saying that size is that bad in the old zones, but compared to the other zones in the expansion packs, wow, those are things that are not going to compare very well. What if they want to combine Thanalan? What if they want to combine Norsa or Gridania? What if they want to say we're not going to zone everything apart with an outer and inner, or old and new, or Central Shroud and North Shroud, or whatever? What if everything is in one gigantic zone? Maybe for the next X-Pack, they might end up doing that. Maybe that's something that is going to be more of a big undertaking than just introducing flying, but maybe flying is a prerequisite to them doing something like that, and they maybe want to introduce that now, assuming they want to in the first place. And here's the thing, I get the idea that some people who are against flying mounts in the old zones would have, which is you drop down in one place, get your quest, get whatever you want, and then fly back out, and the whole zone would seem empty. But in a way, if that was the case, if that was the whole case against flying mounts, then wouldn't that be the case against flying mounts in the other zones as well? Wouldn't we see complaints from people who would say, hey, why are you introducing flying mounts in Heaven's Sword? It seems really empty, or in Shadowbringers and stuff like that. The whole reason why WoW had to retract on the flying mounts in Draenor or whatever it was is because it seems as though Blizzard was catering to a very niche part of the fan base. Very niche part of the fan base who, like I said, wanted to take away all quality of life features, including flying mounts, including meeting stones, including all of that other stuff, who wanted the old attunements back. And those old attunements in WoW, holy hell, I understand some people do like doing that and they think that's more engaging. But when your drop rate is so low for certain things and you have those glitches and stuff like that, and Blizzard is just going to say, you know what, we're going to give these people what they want, and then those people who actually want progression in their games, want us to progress, want us to learn and to improve the game, improve quality of life in their game, they can be left alone. They can finally be left alone, while the people who are just wanting to see everything be stripped away to bare bones, they can have what they want. They can have their experience without trying to impose a will on everybody else. It was more as though it was nothing more than to cater to a very niche fan base, and that was why you saw a lot of people complain that flying mounts were not introduced in that particular expansion, and they had to dial back at the end of the day. With Final Fantasy XIV, again, keep in mind it's the 8th recurrence you will probably need to discover, which is a lot more engaging than just buying something with gold from one particular place, Orgrimmar, Stormwind, wherever your alliance is there. There's no world PvP to worry about, so you don't have that excuse. And unlike WoW, a lot of people in Final Fantasy XIV will welcome those quality of life features, and they'll see the benefit that a lot of flying will have within their game. They always see a lot of benefit. I don't think you can compare that completely with WoW. I don't think Final Fantasy XIV players, the Final Fantasy XIV community, is going to be as unwelcoming as that small subsection of WoW players are, because those small section of WoW players try to impose their will on everybody else because, oh, the quote-unquote filthy casuals want their way. No, they want quality of life. They want for the game to progress. They want Blizzard to learn from their mistakes. They want to learn from archaic game design. And if you want to know why a lot of people have been moving from WoW to Final Fantasy XIV, there's part of your reason why. And no, it's not okay to overhype expectations, and I get why data mining can be dangerous at times, but it is okay for us to speculate. It's okay for us to say, hey, could this be something we're asking for? Is this something that we're asking for? And I think there's something to this. I think there's something there. However, let's not hold our breath too much, because if it ends up just being a coincidence, then we won't be so disappointed if we don't get it, because we won't have our expectations overhyped there. But again, there's something to this. I do believe there is, and I hope there is, because I would love to see Limps on the Mensa as something other than a melting pot from the air. That will do it for this edition of the special report. I kind of did want to talk about this, and then it was better that I just do a special report for this one so I can get my thoughts out on it. Plus, the last few special reports were kind of all about internet drama and stuff like that. So I just wanted to do something a little bit more positive with special report this time, and something that we might be excited for. If you like what you see, please hit that like button down below. Subscribe for more Geek Gaming culture. Consider donating to the Patreon that you might see down below as well. Also, if you want to chime in on what you believe about this episode and about the storyline, go ahead and comment down below. I welcome all the comments. I can't promise I'll answer to all of them, but I will read all of them. Let's do the OC Remix track of the day since we're right here, and we'll take a little bit of the break from the Total Biscuit. I think we have one more on those, so we'll just go into the Final Fantasy thing because that is subject of the special report here. So we'll just do a Final Fantasy remix, and we'll go with something from Anti-Sign, and this is called Ready to March. This is a mix of Final Fantasy VIII music, because they did have the Eden raid in Final Fantasy XIV, and they're using the Force Your Way, a remix of Force Your Way, in that game for the raid boss music. So this is a mix between Stages Set, which is the music that plays when you're going to try to assassinate the sorceress, which is Ida, and of course Force Your Way is the boss theme for Final Fantasy VIII, which is remixed for Final Fantasy XIV, the Eden raid, as I've said before. Very techno like in this particular one. I hope you enjoy it, because I certainly thought this was an interesting mix of the two, and interesting way to mix them up. So with that having been said, go and enjoy it. If you like what you see there, please go support ocremix.org with your financial support, or buy some of the remixes that they put up there. I think they will really much appreciate it. Till next time, my name is JD Shadow, and that just happened.